WJR.
We've gotten their view a bit flat, they say, maybe because everything has been revealed already on the internet. If you're really into cars, you know what's going to be here, but there's still nothing like coming up and touching them, sitting in them, feeling them, smelling them. And Tom Walsh ended us up on a little bit of a more upbeat beat. But now let's talk about some of the other things in the news. And please feel free to bring things up. This is what you guys do seriously for a living. I observe, I read you guys and learn things. That's many times how that happens. As well as sometimes conversations here and there. But the story about Nissan and Carlos Ghosn having real interest in expanding his company to help his company and the new Chrysler, they're working on a project for a small car and the engine and all that. Are we to believe that that's really all they're doing? Or are they testing and feeling and dating a little bit? And Paul Eisenstein seems to think they're testing and feeling and dating a little bit.
Yeah, I had some good conversations with a few folks from Nissan the other day. This is the first, if you will, first date. You don't do much more than hold hands if you're lucky on the first date. But where does it go? There's a very, very high probability, if this works out well, that Nissan will kill the development of their next generation Titan pickup. And they would almost certainly like to get the next generation Titan off a shared platform with Chrysler.
All right, anybody else?
Beyond that, who knows?
Yeah, I would second that, Paul. I think my understanding is those discussions are pretty far along. I think there are a number of storylines coming out of the show with a couple of our, particularly Detroit companies, that we don't know how these stories are going to end. One is, of course, Ford, which we can talk about. The other is Chrysler. Chrysler is not only doing this small car deal with Nissan, they've inked a deal with Chery of China. They've got a deal with Gaz out of Russia to build SUVs in Russia. And I think they're looking at more. The question becomes, is it smarter to be allied with somebody or even acquired by somebody than it is to try and manage all these different deals with all these different manufacturers around the world? One of the trends we see in the industry is people trying to focus their business a lot more, not make it more complicated with a lot more alliances.
Well, they don't have the money.
Well, that's the case. In the case of Chrysler, I think it's a question of they don't really have any choice. They don't have either the geographic scale around the world or the money or the technology base that the Toyotas and the GMs have, and they sort of have to do it with mirrors and try to make up for in speed what they lack in real depth and scale. So it's a tall order for them, but they don't have much choice.
And I would add one other thing. I think there are a number of people that I've talked to this week that seem to think that the two possibilities for Chrysler, one is the Renault-Nissan scenario that Paul is talking about, and I think the other is potentially a Chinese play, that a Chinese manufacturer would essentially acquire Chrysler for its technology, for its U.S. distribution network, for its Chrysler brand, particularly and Jeep brand. They could sell Chrysler in China as a competitor to Buick, essentially.
The problem with that, of course, is political. But there's another issue that Chrysler faces, and we see that with the Sebring. Here they come out with a great line of full-size cars, particularly the 300, which even after, what, 5 years on the market, is it now?
I tell you what, I was looking at, well, I guess it's over that way, a red 300, what are they, RT8? Is that their hot?
Yeah, the high performance.
RT8, I guess. That is one hot American car. And today, and how old is that?
It's almost 5 years old.
It was fabulous.
But then they bring out the new Sebring, which was developed with Mitsubishi. It doesn't look anything like those cars. It doesn't have the technical qualities. It's at the bottom of everybody's ratings, and Consumer Reports just trashed the car recently.
Really?
Even their own people say they don't like it. Nardelli hasn't been very nice about it. And part of the problem is if you have a bunch of different partners that you're going with, you have to do an extremely good job to make sure that your quality, one of the issues that matters. Why do we like BMW? Consistency. We know from the new 1 Series all the way up to their top-end product, you're going to know what you're getting from it. And with Chrysler doing a million different deals, The problem is that there's no consistency from one end to the other in their product, and if they continue to do more and more of these deals, then they lose more.
Well, all right, but this is still a new company, and is this just shaking out some of the old stuff that was left behind?
Jein, as the Germans would say. I mean,
and Daniel knows because he lived in Germany.
I think Paul is spot on in his analysis.
That would be Paul Eisenstein that is spot on.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Of Chrysler and the downfall, the difficulties of trying to manage those kind of alliances, which is why I think ultimately we still are looking at potentially a Renault-Nissan scenario here, but we don't know what we don't know. That's the problem.
We wrap up with our experts. Let's start with Edward Lapham. Just kind of your final overview.
Well, Paul, despite all of the things that we talked about and the talk about the recession and everything, there is some good product here. A couple of things that poked me in the eye. Number one, stop the presses. Chrysler has discovered hybrids. And number two, right here on the Ford stand, it seems that each year it's like a continual update on the product. And Ford now is getting some product that will be heading into their showrooms that I think will help their dealers and the company.
That's good positive news. Let's see what Paul Eisenstein has to say.
Oh, I agree about the product here. General Motors, definitely a company worth watching at the show. Still coming out with more and more interesting product. We see the CTS Coupe, which is a real surprise, one of the few surprises here. In general, look at this show as a preview of the battle royale that's going to take place in a tough market, in a tough year. But beyond that, you'll get a sense of what is happening globally. This is really the show that says this is a global auto industry. What happens in China affects the U.S. and vice versa.
Tom Walsh of the Detroit Free Press.
I think it's going to be harder and harder for the people that aren't in the top tier to get in the top tier. I think we saw 5 car makers from China who didn't hardly cause a ripple here because everybody knows they're not ready for prime time. Even Nissan, who's on the edge of the top elite, very disappointing show. No press conference, no Carlos Ghosn, not much here. Doesn't mean they don't have stuff coming. They're a pretty capable outfit, but I think GM, Toyota are starting to put some distance between themselves and others. Ford's trying to keep up. Honda, as always, does a pretty solid job, but it's going to be harder for the others to keep up, I think.
And Daniel Howes of the Detroit News.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of this stuff. I would add a couple of things. One is I think we're seeing a lot of product parity here in the sense that it used to be, we did this, when we would have had this conversation 3 or 4 years ago, we had been talking about how much stronger some of the Asian product was compared to some of the Detroit product. But today I think we see a lot of product parity, and I think that's nothing but good news for people that depend on these car companies. The other thing I think that's not here but needs to be borne in mind is that while the products they're showing here are for the U.S. market, but increasingly the U.S. market as a share of the global market is going to be a smaller and smaller slice. When you got Rick Wagner saying that 75% of the sales of General Motors are going to be outside the U.S. in a couple of years, and Al Mawley saying the same thing, more or less, that tells you that we truly are in a global industry. And I think companies like GM are outside the U.S. are very well positioned and are very successful in a lot of the developing
Daniel
markets.
Howes of the Detroit News, Tom Walsh of the Detroit Free Press, Paul Eisenstein, thecarconnection.com, Edward Lapham, autonews.com or Automotive News, and the other websites, freep.com and detnews.com. Gentlemen, thank you for sharing your expertise and your time. We always look forward to it.
Thanks, Paul.
We look forward to being back in the Golden Tower of the Fisher Building tomorrow morning. You go out and make it a great one. Regards, Paul W. Smith.